All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive today into Hollywood history. We're using excerpts from Wikipedia's Cinema of the United States entry and some other cool stuff too. So we're going to uncover some of the secrets, myths, and just the really interesting evolution of, well, movie magic.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating story. One of innovation, power struggles, and of course, all those larger-than-life personalities, the ones we all picture when we think about the movies.
Exactly. And speaking of those larger-than-life personalities, let's start by busting a myth. When we think of Hollywood, we think about Hollywood, California, right? Like, that's where movies were born.
Right, like the Walk of Fame, the sign on the hill.
But that's not actually how it all began, is it?
Not at all, actually. The real action started way over on the East Coast, in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Yep.
That's pretty far from those California palm trees. So what on earth drew filmmakers to Fort Lee in the first place?
Well, for one thing, it was close to New York City, which, as you can imagine, back then was already a hub for theater, for finance, for the arts. But Fort Lee also had these beautiful, diverse landscapes. Like you had these amazing cliffs overlooking the Hudson River, forests, open fields, all kinds of things. Perfect for those early filmmakers, They were just starting to experiment with outdoor shots and things. They didn't have to go build these big, elaborate sets. They just had all this natural beauty right there.
So it sounds like Fort Lee had a lot going for it. But then what on earth happened? What shifted the focus all the way to Hollywood?
Well, this is where things get interesting. Enter Thomas Edison.
Oh, wow, the light bulb guy.
That's the one. But, besides the light bulb and the phonograph, he also had all these patents, tons of them, related to filmmaking technology.
Oh, so he was also into movies.
Oh, yeah. But the thing about Edison was he wasn't exactly keen on sharing. He liked to use those patents to, let's just say, discourage any competition.
So he was basically suing anyone who tried to make a movie.
Pretty much. Filmmakers back on the East Coast were constantly facing these legal threats from Edison's company, so they really needed a way to escape his grip.
And that's where California comes in.
Bingo. Filmmakers literally fled across the country, trying to get as far away from Edison's lawyers as they could.
Can you imagine?
And California offered them that fresh start, a place where they could just make movies without that constant fear of lawsuits. Plus, let's be real, the weather was way nicer than those New Jersey winters.
Yeah, that sounds pretty appealing. Sunshine and no lawsuits. I think I'd pack my bags too. So all these filmmakers land in Hollywood, and I guess they just start making movies, right?
Well, it wasn't quite that simple. I mean, in the beginning, the Hollywood scene was pretty chaotic. You had all these small production companies popping up, dozens of them, all competing for attention, for resources, just trying to figure out how to, survive.
So how did those small companies become those giant studios, the ones we all know today?
It was a gradual process, for sure, driven by a few key factors, really. One of the biggest ones was the introduction of sound in 1927.
Oh, right. So before that, everything was silent film.
Exactly. They relied a lot on visuals and sometimes had live music, but then along comes the jazz singer.
I've heard of that. Wasn't that a big deal?
He was a total game changer. I mean, here was a film with synchronized dialogue, songs, everything.
You could actually hear the actors talking.
For the first time. It wasn't just a novelty, it was a revelation. It showed the whole world what film could really be, immersive, emotionally powerful, a whole new way to tell stories.
I bet all those silent film stars were freaking out.
Some of them embraced it, some not so much. But the studios, they definitely jumped on board, investing in sound equipment, scrambling to find actors who could actually, act and sing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So sound was a turning point, but how did that lead to, that whole studio system we always hear about?
Well, once sound came into the picture, filmmaking just got a lot more complex and expensive. You needed bigger crews, specialized equipment, sound stages. Basically, only the companies with a lot of resources could really compete.
So it squeezed out all those smaller companies.
In a way, yeah. The whole industry kind of consolidated.
Right.
And you had a few powerful studios emerge as the major players, like MGM, Paramount, Warner Bros., the big names.
The ones we still know today.
Exactly. And they didn't just make the movies. They controlled pretty much every aspect of the industry.
So they owned the studios, the equipment.
All of that. Plus they had the distribution networks. And even owned the theaters where the movies were shown.
Wow, so they had a lot of power.
It was a vertically integrated system, which gave them a huge amount of control over what audiences got to see.
So they could basically make or break careers.
Oh, absolutely. They could promote their own films, obviously, and basically dictate the terms for everyone. The actors, directors, writers, you name it.
And so it sounds like a monopoly. almost. Was there any pushback against this system?
Oh, all the time. There were always tensions between the studios and the talent.
Like the actors and directors wanted more freedom.
Exactly. Actors wanted more creative control. Writers hated the restrictions imposed on them. And the independent producers, they just couldn't break in.
So even during that golden age of Hollywood, there were cracks in the system.
Oh, yeah. Always. One of the most interesting things about that whole era is this contrast, between the glamorous image that Hollywood projected and what was actually happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, that makes sense. It wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Not exactly. I mean, it was a time of amazing creativity and innovation, but also really fierce competition, ruthless business practices, and of course, those infamous scandals that rocked the industry.
Scandals?
Oh, yeah. We can't forget those.
Fair tab.
Well, you put all that fame, fortune, and, larger-than-life personalities together, and Hollywood becomes this magnet for gossip and intrigue. There were affairs, divorces, substance abuse, you name it, even the occasional crime of passion.
Wow. Sounds juicy.
It was all the stuff of, tabloid headlines.
So it wasn't all glitz and glamour then?
No, not at all. But the thing is, these scandals weren't just, gossip. They had a real impact on the industry.
How so?
Well, they forced studios to try to control their stars even more, manage their public image, protect their reputations.
They had a lot invested in those stars, I imagine.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the bad press they were worried about. They were also getting pressure from, religious groups, conservative politicians, people who were concerned about the content of these films.
They thought Hollywood was too risque.
Some of them did, yeah. They saw films as a threat to traditional morality. And they really pushed for censorship.
Wow.
And that actually led to the creation of the Hays Code in 1930.
The Hays Code, what was that exactly?
It was basically a set of really strict guidelines dictating what could and couldn't be shown in movies.
So what kind of things?
I mean, everything, nudity, sexuality, violence, profanity, you name it.
Wow, it sounds pretty restrictive.
It was, very much so. And it actually had a huge impact on Hollywood filmmaking for decades.
I can imagine.
Some people argue that it just stifled creativity. Others say that it actually made filmmakers more subtle, more innovative in their storytelling.
I guess it's all a matter of perspective. But either way, it's so interesting to see how these outside forces, social anxieties, political pressure, things like that, actually shaped how Hollywood evolved.
It's this constant push and pull, Hollywood has always had to walk this tightrope between wanting to entertain, obviously, and also trying to reflect and sometimes even challenge societal norms.
So even with the Hays Code and the studio system, the golden age of Hollywood still produced some of the most iconic films and stars of all time. What were some of the standouts from that era?
Oh, man, where do we even begin? You had those amazing musicals with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and then the gritty gangster films starring Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney, and of course, sweeping historical epics like Gone with the Wind. And we can't forget about the screwball comedies. That brought us Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn.
What a lineup. And those films still resonate with people today.
They do. I think they capture a spirit and style that's just timeless. And even with those limitations from the Hays Code, those filmmakers managed to tell these compelling stories, create memorable characters and just push the boundaries of what was possible.
It shows how true creativity can still thrive, even with constraints.
Exactly. But eventually, those constraints started to crumble. And in the late 1940s, the golden age of Hollywood, well, it started to fade.
So what happened?
Well, that antitrust case we mentioned, it finally went into effect. And studios had to sell off their theater chains. And that really weakened their control over the whole distribution system. And then, on top of all that, you had television arriving on the scene.
So people could just stay home and watch TV.
Exactly. They suddenly had another way to be entertained.
So I guess the golden age wasn't so golden anymore. Hollywood had some serious competition all of a sudden.
That's right. And they really had to adapt or risk becoming irrelevant. They started experimenting with new technologies, widescreen formats, Technicolor, things like that, hoping to offer audiences something they couldn't get on those little black and white TVs. But even more importantly, they had to start telling different kinds of stories.
Stories that reflected what was happening in the world.
Exactly. The old formulas just weren't working anymore. Audiences were tired of the same old plots and characters. They wanted something more realistic, more gritty, something that reflected the social and political changes happening all around them.
And that sounds like the perfect segue to talk about the rise of New Hollywood. But I think we'll save that for our next segment. It's a whole new chapter in Hollywood's history, one that takes us from the gritty streets of, Taxi Driver to the epic space battles of Star Wars.
It's going to be a wild ride. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome back to our Hollywood Deep Dive. We were talking about how the Golden Age was fading, and audiences were hungry for something different.
Enter
New Hollywood.
That's right. You had all these young filmmakers coming up in the late 60s and 70s, ready to shake things up. They were influenced by European cinema, the counterculture,
Yeah.
And they wanted to make films that felt more real, more raw.
So what made these new Hollywood films so different?
Well, they were much more character-driven, often focusing on flawed heroes, complex moral dilemmas. The cinematography was more experimental. The editing was more dynamic. And the soundtracks, oh man, they were using rock and roll, reflecting what was happening in music at the time.
So it was a total departure from those, polished studio films of the Golden Age.
It was a deliberate rejection of those old formulas. These filmmakers wanted to make films that felt authentic, films that spoke to a generation that was, questioning everything.
Were there any films that really stand out as marking this shift?
Oh, absolutely. Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, that was a game changer. It was violent, stylish, morally ambiguous. It really shocked some audiences, but others were just captivated by it.
Especially younger audiences, I bet.
Yeah, they saw it as this reflection of their own, rebellious spirit.
It sounds like a lot of those new Hollywood films were pushing boundaries, challenging social norms. Did they get any backlash for that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Some critics thought they were too violent, too cynical, too focused on, the dark underbelly of American life. But others praised them for being bold, honest, and willing to tackle tough subjects.
So it was a time of real debate and creative energy in Hollywood.
It absolutely was. And out of that energy, you had some of the most iconic films ever made. Films like The Godfather, Taxi Driver, Apocalypse Now, Jaws, Star Wars. I mean, the list goes on.
It has an incredible list of films.
It was a truly remarkable era. And it's interesting to see how these filmmakers, a lot of them started as outsiders, and then they actually became part of the establishment they were rebelling against.
What do you mean?
Well, they brought their fresh perspectives, their new techniques into the studio system, and they actually helped revitalize it, pave the way for the blockbuster era.
So New Hollywood didn't completely destroy the studio system.
No, they transformed it. They infused it with new energy, new ideas, new ways of storytelling, and that led to this really interesting period where you had these big-budget spectacle films alongside smaller, more personal, more experimental, independent films.
So there was room for different kinds of films.
Exactly. And that diversity of storytelling is what makes Hollywood so fascinating. It's always been this place where different genres, styles, perspectives can coexist, even if one tends to dominate at any given time.
So what happened after New Hollywood? Did it just fade away?
Not really. I mean, its influence continued, but the industry was about to change again. This is where we see the rise of the modern blockbuster. The growth of home video and eventually those streaming services, that would change everything.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how much has changed. We went from going to the movies every week to having this endless library of films at our fingertips.
It's been a huge shift, and it's had a major impact on how films are made, how they're marketed, how we watch them.
Let's start with the blockbusters. How did they become so dominant?
Well, you can see the seeds being planted back in the New Hollywood era. With films like Jaws and Star Wars, they proved that these big-budget, special effects-driven movies could appeal to massive audiences and, of course, made huge profits.
Yeah, those films were cultural events.
They were, and studios noticed that. They realized that if they invested heavily in these big releases, they could potentially make a ton of money. So the focus shifted towards creating franchises, sequels, prequels, films that could be marketed globally and that could generate revenue from, merchandise, video games, everything.
So it became less about taking risks on original stories and more about playing it safe with familiar properties.
In some ways, yes, but there's still room for creativity within the blockbuster landscape. I mean, some filmmakers use those big budgets and effects to tell really compelling stories, to push the boundaries of visual storytelling, create experiences you just couldn't get at home.
So it wasn't all bad.
No, not at all. The blockbuster era has given us some incredible films, but it has raised concerns about, the homogenization of Hollywood, the dominance of a few studios, and that pressure to appeal to the lowest common denominator.
It's that tension between art and commerce again.
It is. It's something Hollywood's always struggled with. But we can't forget about the other side of things, the rise of independent film. While blockbusters were ruling the theaters, indie films were carving out their own space, offering these alternative voices and stories.
I love those smaller, more personal films.
Me too.
Yeah.
And the growth of home video in the 80s and 90s really helped support independent cinema. Suddenly, filmmakers didn't need a big studio to distribute their work. They could bypass those traditional gatekeepers, connect directly with audiences through video stores and eventually online platforms.
So technology was both a challenge and an opportunity for independent filmmakers.
Exactly. And it's amazing to see how those early indie pioneers paved the way for the streaming revolution.
Yeah, streaming has changed everything.
It has.
But before we dive into that, you mentioned how some of those new Hollywood filmmakers actually became part of the establishment. Can you give me some examples?
Sure, think about Steven Spielberg. He started with low-budget, kind of genre-bending films like Duel and The Sugarland Express. And then he directed Jaws, which became a massive hit. And after that, he was a blockbuster director. He made some of the most successful and beloved films ever. E.T., Jurassic Park, But he also tackled more serious subjects with films like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan.
So he managed to balance commercial success with, artistic integrity.
He did, and he wasn't the only one. George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, they all started as rebels pushing boundaries, but they also achieved mainstream success, and their films shaped Hollywood for decades.
It's an amazing trajectory. They went from being outsiders to insiders, but they never lost that creative vision.
Exactly. And their stories show us that Hollywood is this complex, ever-evolving system where art and commerce are constantly interacting.
This deep dive has really shown how Hollywood has changed over time, from those early days in Fort Lee to the rise of the blockbusters. But it feels like the story's not over yet. There's a whole other chapter to explore. The internet, streaming, new ways of watching movies.
That's right. It's a whole new world.
And I think we'll have to dive into that in our final segment.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
All right, we're back for the final part of our Hollywood deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from silent films to blockbusters. So where does Hollywood go from here? What does the future hold?
Well, one thing we've learned from Hollywood's history is that change is inevitable. And right now, technology is driving a lot of that change. And, of course, how people consume entertainment.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What kind of technology are we talking about exactly?
Well, there's some pretty mind-blowing stuff on the horizon, like virtual reality.
We are?
Yeah, it has the potential to totally immerse us in stories. Imagine, putting on a headset and not just watching a movie, but being inside of it, feeling like you're right there in the action.
That would be amazing. But how would that change the storytelling itself?
Well, filmmakers would have to think differently. They'd have to engage all of our senses, not just sight and sound. It could lead to whole new genres, new ways of experiencing narrative.
It's like a whole new frontier.
Yeah.
But VR is not the only thing, right? What about artificial intelligence? How's AI going to impact Hollywood?
It's already being used, mostly for special effects, post-production, things like that. But it could go way beyond that. Some people are even talking about AI writing scripts, directing scenes, even creating digital actors that can perform on screen.
Digital actors. That's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? I mean, what does that even mean for human actors?
It's definitely mind-bending. And it's raising a lot of questions about creativity. What's authentic? What's the role of human artists in all of this? Some people worry that AI will replace humans altogether, but others think...
It's a big question. We have to figure out how to use these powerful tools responsibly. But it's not just about the technology, right? You mentioned how people are consuming entertainment differently.
Yeah, think about how much has changed in just the last few decades. We went from those weekly trips to the movie theater, to watching movies on VHS, then DVD, and now streaming services give us all this content on demand.
Yeah, it's true. I can't even remember the last time I went to a theater.
A lot of people feel that way. And this shift to streaming has been huge for Hollywood. On the one hand, it's opened up opportunities for filmmakers to reach a global audience, but it's also put a lot of pressure on the traditional studios.
So how are they adapting?
They're getting creative. Some studios are launching their own streaming services. Others are partnering with existing platforms. They're experimenting with new types of content, like limited series, interactive stories, things like that. They're trying to figure out how to stand out, in this crowded market where everyone's competing for attention.
It sounds like a time of big change, but also a lot of potential.
Yeah.
What do you think the future holds for Hollywood?
Well, one thing's for sure. The lines between film and television are blurring. We're seeing so much high-quality content on streaming services. It's hard to even say what's a movie and what's a TV show anymore.
It's all about the story, right?
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about this moment. We're seeing new voices, new stories, new ways to experience those stories. It's a time of experimentation and innovation. And I think the next few decades will be fascinating for anyone who loves movies.
It really is amazing to think about how Hollywood started with those silent films over 100 years ago. And it's still evolving, still finding new ways to tell stories.
It is. And despite all the challenges, I'm optimistic about the future of cinema. As long as there are stories to be told, people will find ways to tell them. And Hollywood will be there, connecting us, entertaining us, making us think.
This deep dive has been incredible. It's given me a whole new appreciation for Hollywood and all the forces that have shaped it over the years. I'm leaving feeling really excited about what the future holds. Who knows what kind of movie magic we'll be experiencing in 100 years.
That's the beauty of it. The story of Hollywood is still being written. And we're all part of it. So keep watching those movies, support the stories that you love, and keep dreaming about what's possible.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Hollywood. We'll see you next time.
Alo? 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 Ô này? Non. Non. C'est moi, Bernard. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a, monsieur? Oh là là. Pardon. Xôm tô lục bảng. Ý, chả lòng lê ta. Alo? Alo?
Ni hai Pinker. Gia gì mấy xí à?
À, ngò bài. Chô bê chân cả tăng tờ vĩnh. Alo? 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 Tùy ní lon tực. Miên phlưu chép tiền nơi cả lại nai lục. Ba. Anh miên phlưu chép tiền hay tây tiền. Xông tô. Ê, không tập phí. Alo? Tùy ní bát chua ra. Miên anh á chua trời do mà mình tì bát à. Ê, bát chua. Bát chả lòng lấy tây tiền.
Alo chà, lột nga nín.
Alo, ô này, bóng á.
Alo, bong ná.
Bóng phiang xe ôn ai nâng nè. Alo, alo.
Chà bong.
Mà đai ôn, mà nâu thế hả?
Chà, cột mà này tê bong.
Hình ọ cha.
អ្នកម្ដាយទីទេងាប់ហើយខ្ញុំបែកការអស់